All right, I think we should go ahead and get started. So welcome back, everybody. What we have on the agenda for tonight is we are going to talk about Microsoft Word and the joy and wonder that is Microsoft Word. And we are going to create the totally awesome, way cool adventure flyer in class today. So that's going to be our plan for what we're going to do. Your homework for next week is going to be, there's a different flyer, very similar to the flyer that we are going to be doing in class today, called Puppy for Sale, that you'll have to do. And then your other homework for this week is that I'm going to ask you to create your own flyer for, anything, something that is, school appropriate, but it could be on any topic. So we'll talk more about that in a little bit. But the first thing that I wanted to do is to remind you about a couple of things about our class and Canvas. As I said last time, everything, and by everything, I mean everything, is done inside of Canvas. The only thing that's not done inside of Canvas is the actual assignments, but you use Canvas to publish your answers. So to get to Canvas, you want to go in to Canvas. So if it's not already a link on your browser, you can go to SJCC and then Canvas, and it should pop up. And when you sign in and you remember your password, then the class that we are in is Microsoft Office. So when I go into the Microsoft Office, and I'm going to click on the button here that lets me do it as if I'm a student. So I'll click on the student view. So this is what the Canvas should look like, again, from your point of view. Now, there are two different ways of accessing the assignments. One way of accessing the assignments is to click on the button that says Modules. And when you click onto Modules, I've broken everything up into, well, modules. So Word Week 1, Word Week 2, Word Week 3, Excel Week 1, 2, 3, Access 1, 2, 3, Presentations, and Extra Credit. So one way of accessing the material is to go into Word Week 1. And inside of Word Week 1, we have the book. The chapter is right here. So chapter 1 book is in your Canvas. So you can download it and have it for, whatever reason that you might want to have it. In addition, I've printed it out, and so you should all have a copy of the book. It's over on the table over there if you didn't pick it up. The other thing that are on here is there are some pictures that are used in the assignments, and they are all here. So Mountain Trail is something we're going to be using today. So Mountain Trail is right here. Puppy is something that you're going to use later on in the Puppy for Sale assignment. So all of the stuff is here. And the 3 assignments for this week's stuff is right here. So Chapter 1, Part 1 is the adventure flyer. This is what we're going to do in class today. Chapter 1, Part 2 is right here, the creating a flyer with a picture of Puppy for Sale. And then Chapter 1, Part 3, create your own flyer is right here. So like I said, there are 2 ways of accessing the assignments. One is to go by way of modules. The other is to go by way of assignments. And so if I go into assignments, unfortunately, by default, Canvas likes to show things by date. The problem with showing things by date in my class is that everything has the same due date. What is the due date for all assignments in this class? Right, May 20, whatever it is. So show by date is going to show you all of the assignments all at once. So instead, if you do show by type, it's organized by content. So show by type is what you really want, to have happen. And again, we have Word Chapter 1, Word Chapter 1, Part 2, Part 1, Part 3. Here's Chapter 2, Part 1, Part 2, Part 3. Chapter 3, Part 1, Part 2, Part 3, Part 4. So all of the assignments for Word are listed here. The other thing is there's a link that says Files. And in Files, we have all of the related files for the assignments. All of the stuff is found inside of here. So there are pictures inside of here that you can use. There are the answer keys are inside of here. The book is also inside of here. So another place to get to the book is to click on the book. And then here's the book, Word Chapter 1, Word Chapter 2, Word Chapter 3. And the thing about the book is that if I open up the book right at the moment, this is obviously what our plan is, what we're going to be doing today. But more importantly, if you turn to page 3 of the book, this is what our assignment is going to look like. So this is exactly what the assignment is going to look like. This is the answer key. So when you are, if you turn it in and you don't get everything correct, and Joe sends it back and says, look at the answer key, look at the answer key. Probably there's a typo. Or you used a different font, or you didn't put in a particular color, or something like that is the issue. All right, so what we want to do today is we want to actually go ahead and start creating our awesome little assignment. And to do that, in your book, if you turn to page 4 of the book, so WD4, it tells you to run Word and create a blank document. So there are several different ways that you can access Microsoft Word. In most cases, you'll have Microsoft Word listed in your doc down at the bottom of the screen. And so you can access it by single-clicking the Word icon in the taskbar down at the bottom, or on the Mac, the dock down at the bottom. The other way to do it is on Windows to click onto the Start menu. And again, very likely it will be in the Start menu. If it's not, for some reason, you can always get to it by going onto All Programs, and then by scrolling down to Microsoft Office. And then inside of Microsoft Office, we have Microsoft Word. So what I want you to do is go ahead and open up Microsoft Word. And yes?
How do you open the thing now?
What do you mean? You mean what's the password? There is no password. So just do Control Alt Delete and then press Enter.
Turn it on, the button on the corner. Bottom one? The bottom.
Yeah. And once it loads through, then you'll do Control Alt Delete and press Enter, and then the password, there is no password. So password is blank, and not BLANK, but just hit Enter. One of the things that I will tell you about Microsoft in general, and that is that anytime you open up any Office product, whether it's Word, Excel, PowerPoint, or Access, they always have a bunch of templates that are already set up. So if I click on a business, it shows me all of these business templates that I can use. If I click on a business cards, it's got all of these business cards that I could use. If I click on to personal, it has the templates for personal stuff. Almost always, it is a bad idea to use one of the default templates. The reason that it's generally a bad idea to use the templates is that the person who created the templates knows exactly why they created the template, and they know exactly why they actually set it up the way they set it up. The way they set it up probably is not going to be the same way that you would have set it up if you had set it up. The analogy I always like to give is that if I am writing a paper and the teacher tells me that we get to do a group paper and there are 5 of us that are going to work on the paper together, and that sounds good until you actually start to do it. Because what generally ends up happening is that one person does all of the work and everybody else just puts their name to the end of it. And that's because when you're writing a paper or when you're designing a template or when you're creating a spreadsheet or whatever, you have your own ideas about how it should be put together. And so almost never do I think it's a good idea to use somebody else's templates. Almost always, it's better to use your own template. And so to use your own template, what you want to do is you want to use a blank document. So blank document is what we want to create our or to start working on our assignments. And in fact, that's what they say to do at the bottom of page 4. So at the bottom of page 4, just says to launch Word, and then click onto the blank template in order to work on your assignments. Now, a couple of things that I want to point out about how all of the Office applications are put together. The first thing I want to tell you about is this guy up here at the top. So this guy up here at the top is what is now referred to as the ribbon. The original term for this was known as the Fluid User Interface. That's what it originally was going to be. And I personally kind of wish they had kept the name Fluid User Interface, because if you take that and just use the first letter of it, it means that you have a FUI, which is exactly what I thought of it when Microsoft Office first came out with the idea of the ribbon. And the idea behind the ribbon is that all of the tools and objects that used to be found in drop-down menus are now found in this ribbon, and they're grouped together in different groupings. So the groupings are called tabs. So we have a home tab, which has the main stuff that we do in Word. There's an insert tab. There's a design tab. There's a page layout tab. There's a references tab, a mailings tab, a review tab, and a view tab in Word 2013, which is the version that I have on this machine. If you download the latest version, some of the tabs are going to be pretty much the same, but sometimes some of the stuff that's inside of them are slightly different. But it's all basically grouped together in the same fashion. The other thing is that within the tabs, there are the different groupings together of those tabs. So we have the clipboard, and the font, and the paragraph, and the styles. Now, for those of you who are Mac users, by default on the Mac, in the ribbon, the ribbon does not display display the group titles. So by default, it does not show clipboard and font and paragraph and styles. If you're a Mac user and you want it to say clipboard and font and group and styles and so on, what you want to do is you want to go into, and what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to switch my, let's see here, if I do, where is it that I do my swap? Host. And no, that's not what I wanted to do. Now I know how to do this. Where is my thingy? Well, shoot. All right, I'll come back to that. I'll come back to that later. There is a way that I can actually show this screen. I thought it was by hitting share. There it is. There it is. Yeah, there we go. So I got share. So if I click on to share on mine, so this is the Mac version of the Mac version. And so in the Mac version, what I can do is I can go on home and insert and draw and design and so on. So again, the tabs are not exactly the same on the Mac as they are on Windows, but they're similar. But you'll notice that it says clipboard and font and so on. That's because in my Word, I went on Word Preferences. And when I went on to Word Preferences, I went to View. And when I went to View, I click on the button over here in the ribbon that says Show Group Titles. So normally on the Mac, you can't show the group titles. But if you want to, you can. You can show the group titles. So now I want to make the other mark. Oops, I don't want to send a message to the other mark. I want to make the other mark the host again. Yep. And I want to share my screen right here. Questions so far? Any questions? Okay. So again, the ribbon is how we do all of the tools on Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Access, and so on. So the first thing that we want to do in here is I am going to put myself back to normal. And the first thing that that we want to do is we want to enter in some text. So we are on page 5. And what they want us to do is they want us to type in the word adventure. So we're going to type in adventure, A-D-V-E-N-T-U-R-E, and then with an exclamation point. Now, one of the things that that the book is telling you to do that I am not going to do, but you are welcome to do if you choose, is that is to show you that there is a button over here that is called the show paragraph markings, and you can show or hide the paragraph markings. The book likes to show the paragraph markings because if you show the paragraph markings, and let me change my zoom so it's a little bit easier to see. If you show the paragraph markings, then it indicates when you are putting in a space or when you're hitting return that you're putting in paragraphs and so on. Personally, I find them distracting, and so I usually turn them off. So I am not going to have them on, except for when there's something specific that I want to show you. So one of the things you will find is that in the book, it may look like there are dots on the screen. There are not dots on the screen. Those indicate spaces. All right, so what they want us to do is after we type in adventure, they want us to hit return. So we want to hit return, and we're on page number 6. And then they want us to put in another blank line. So we'll hit return one more time. And they've actually changed the zoom to the zoom that I have. So if you want to change your zoom to my zoom, you can do that as well. To change the zoom, it's done by going on view. And then the zoom that we're doing is page width. So it'll change the view to match the width of the page. You can also do view and do one page, and it will show you the entire page. If you have a document that is 2 or more pages long, you could do multiple pages, in which case it will show multiple pages at once. You can also reset it to 100% by clicking onto 100%. You can also click onto zoom, where you can specifically type in exactly what you want it to be. So you could have it be at 200%, 100%, 75%, or if you want it to be at 142%, you can do 142, and it will zoom to 142%. I don't know why you'd want it to be at 142%, but if you want it to be, you're welcome to have it be at that. If I want to zoom it in higher than that, I can have it zoom up to, what is it? Here's that 400%, and then 500%. I think 500% is the most that it allows it to be. If you have it zoomed at 500%, you have to, of course, scroll in order to find where you're at. I'd recommend against 500% unless you are wanting to zoom in on something very specific. You want to check something like maybe a picture. You inserted a picture and you're wanting to check something specific about that picture. That would be about the only time that I would do that. Normally, page width. And again, this is on view and then the zoom area. Most of the time, you're going to want to be on home. Most of the functions that you're going to do in Word are found on the Home tab. All right. In Microsoft Word, as with pretty much all word processing programs, as you are typing, it automatically will move on to the next line when you come to the end of the line. And so this is what is known as word wrap. Word wrap means that as you're typing along, when you come to the end of the line, it just automatically wraps to the next line. So what they want us to do is they want us to, and this is on page 9, they want us to type in explore scenic trails with breathtaking views as you travel through meadows, forests, streams, and mountains in an off-road vehicle. And then return or enter. So one of the things I want to point out is that, again, this little paragraph icon, if I click onto this paragraph icon, it will show me where I have hit return, because again, it has this little paragraph symbol. And there are little dots indicating spaces in between them. Those are indicating spaces. But you'll notice that when it comes to the end of this line, it does not have a return. It does not have that symbol on it. And that's because I did not hit return. I just kept typing because we're using using word wrap, and word wrap automatically is going to wrap the content onto the next line. Questions so far? Any questions? All right, so the next thing they want us to do is on page number 10. So on page 10, they want us to, on a new paragraph, they want us to type in self-guided tours. And they want me to misspell it, so I'm going to misspell it, T-U-O-R-S. And what happens is that Microsoft will automatically highlight with a red squiggly line anything that it thinks is a misspelled word. Don't ignore the red squiggly lines. If you see a red squiggly line, it thinks that there is a misspelled word. Now, it may be a misspelled word. It may not be a misspelled word. So I forget if I've added my name to this or not. If I type in Mark, yeah, I did. So if I type in the word Mark Branham, it does not come up with a squiggly line. Why does it not come up with a squiggly line? Because what I did is this. When you have a red squiggly line, one of the things you can do is you can right-click on the red squiggly line, and it will tell you what it thinks are the correct spelling of the word. On the Mac, if you have a right mouse button, you would click the right mouse button, or you could do a control click on it to do the same functionality. So in this case, we obviously did misspell tours, and it's actually tours. But if it weren't a mistake, then you have three options. Option one, which is not the best option, is to keep the red squiggly line. I don't recommend that you do that. Option number two is ignore all. What ignore all does is ignore all means within this document and this document only. Anytime you see the word T-U-O-R-S, I have decided that this is the correct spelling of this word. Please do not mark it as a misspelled word. That's what ignore all means for to Microsoft Word. The third option is if you know for a fact that this is the correct spelling of the word, and you want it to become part of the permanent dictionary for this computer, you can add it to the dictionary. And when you add it to the dictionary, from that moment on, it would no longer be counted as misspelled on this machine, but this machine only. So if you, the reason that Mark Branham is not coming up with a red squiggly line is because I added it to the dictionary. And so it's checking against the dictionary and it says, oh, it's not in the normal dictionary, but it's in our personal localized dictionary. I'm going to treat it as okay. That makes sense? To access that stuff, it's on File. And by the way, one of the things that I absolutely hate about Office 2013 and newer is that if you click on the File button, it looks like you have erased absolutely everything. I promise you, you have not erased anything. If I click onto the File button, everything hides and shows up with the stuff that has to do with the file. And in the file, one of the choices in File is File Options. And if I go into File Options, one of the choices I have in File Options is Proofing. And in Proofing, one of the things is a custom dictionary. And inside a custom dictionary, we have the custom dictionary. And if I go into the custom dictionary and I want to erase the custom dictionary, I can say remove the custom dictionary. And because I've removed now the custom dictionary and I click OK and I click OK, and I'm going to save this so that I can close it, or actually I'll just copy it. I'll just copy it all, copy. If I close out of Word and I reopen Word, wait for it to close. Okay, I reopen Word and I paste it all back in. And I go into my options and I go into my proofing, custom dictionaries. The custom dictionary is not there, although the roaming custom dictionary is. I can choose to suggest from the main dictionary only, and that will force it to use the main dictionary. And if I recheck the document on it, why is it still coming up? It's still coming up because it's using the roaming dictionary. And I've saved it in the roaming dictionary. Shoot. So I'd have to actually completely remove it from the main dictionary and then come back in. The point is that I've added Mark Branham to the main dictionary. If I wanted to add an extra M to it, then he becomes like this. And it becomes then a squiggly line. And again, I could then choose to right click and say, this is what it's supposed to be, this is what it's supposed to be, or I could choose ignore all to ignore it, or I could choose to add to dictionary if I wanted to add this to the dictionary, or I could just choose to keep it as a red squiggly line. All right, so what they want us to do is they want us to take the tours and make it spelled correctly. So I'm going to spell it correctly by right-clicking and choosing self-guided tours. Questions? All right. All right, page 11, we have a little bit more text. So they want us to say self-guided tours are available. And then they want us to hit return. And they want us to say that it's open March through October. And that all vehicles and gear are provided. And that to book your adventure, call 555-8928. All right. The last thing I wanted to talk about on this before we save this is there are a couple of things. Thing number one is that at the bottom of page 11, they are talking about organizing text in a flyer. So like it says, there are three main things in a flyer. You always are going to have the headline, which is whatever it is that you are offering or doing. The body copy, which is the the material that you are actually presenting, and then the signature line, which has the call to action, whether it's go to the website, send an email, give us a call, buy the book, whatever it is that come see the movie, whatever it is that that is all about. All right. The other thing is that page 12 talks about how to navigate throughout a document. And I think pretty much everybody knows that you can use your mouse to point and click and navigate throughout your document. But there are often much, much, much better ways of doing it. So the first thing I'll tell you is that we have up, down, left, right arrow keys on your keyboard, and the up, down, left, right arrow keys do in fact allow you to move up, down, left, and right. And you know where you are at because of the flashing cursor. The flashing cursor is wherever you are at that particular moment. The other thing is that, so if you just want to do one character left or right, you just do one left or right. But if you hold down the control key while you do a left or right, it will move by word. So I'm moving to the right by word, moving to the left by word. So control left right will move by word. If I do control up or control down, it will move paragraph by paragraph. Now, in this case, it's not totally obvious because we don't have a lot of paragraphs, but what I can show you is this. So if you're typing, I want you to stop for a moment and just look up at the screen. I am going to show you one of my all-time favorite things that you can do in Microsoft Word. And that is that you can create fake text. Why do you want to create fake text? Because your boss has asked you to write to create a template for a business letter. But you don't actually have any information that you are actually saying because you're not actually really writing a business letter, but you want there to be some text in there for the business letter. But you don't want to say blah, 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 or here's where you would type in the text that you want to say. So instead, Microsoft Word has some fake text that you can automatically put in. One of them is to do equals LOREM, and then open parentheses, and then the number of sentences and the number of paragraphs, and then close parentheses, and then hit return, and it will create some fake Latin text. There are other things that you can do. You can have it, if you don't want to do equals lipsum, there's another one that you can do that I'm blanking on off the top of my head. I know I have it because I've written it down, where you can pull in information from the help the help center of Microsoft Office, and it will just randomly pick out a chunk of words from the help center on it. There's another one where you can put in where it will do something else. I'm trying to remember what the other one is. Anyway, the point is that you can put in fake text. So if I want to put in, let's say I want to have 10 words and I want to have, I don't know, 10 paragraphs. And I want to easily go between each paragraph. I can hold down my control key and the down arrow, and it will take me down each paragraph. And then control up lets me go up each paragraph. And again, control right goes to the right by words. Control left goes left by words. If I do page down, it will go to the end of the page. If I do page up, it'll go up by the end of the page, or by the screen rather. If I'm all the way down at the end of the document, and I want to quickly go all the way up to the top of the document, it is Alt Control Page Up, or Alt and then Alt Control Page Up, and then to go all the way down, it's Alt Control and Page Down. If I want to go to the beginning of the document, it is Control Home to the beginning and Control End to the end. So Control Home at the beginning, Control End to get to the end. So anytime you want to quickly jump from the top to the end, you can go Control Home, Control End in order to toggle between those. So all of that's on page 12 of your document. If your mouse has a scroll bar in it, you can use the scroll bar to scroll as well. It's a little wheel that's inside of your mouse. And for Mac users, most Mac mice have a scroll wheel, even though it's not actually a wheel because it's actually part of the mouse itself. And so you just hold it and use your middle finger, and it will act as the scroll wheel. All right, going back to our document here. So the last thing we want to do on this for the moment is we want to save. So to save this, we want to do Control S to save. And when we do Control S to save, it brings us to this back area. This back area is called the backstage. Clicking on the file opens up the backstage. So another way of getting to here would be to do File and then Save. Does the same thing. When you are saving, by default, Microsoft assumes that you want to save things on the Microsoft Cloud. If you want to save it on the cloud, you can if you are logged in. If you're not logged in, then what you want to do is you want to save it onto your computer. So I click on the computer, and when I click onto the computer, it says, great, where do you want to save it? So if I wanted to save it to my desktop, I would click on the desktop. If I want to save it into my documents, I would click onto my documents. It doesn't really matter where you save it as long as you know where you saved it. So I always recommend saving documents in your documents folder or on your desktop, depending on how cluttered you want your desktop to be. In this class, I'm going to click on a browse, and then I am going to save it in my documents. And inside of my documents, I am going to create a new folder. I'm going to create I'm going to right click and create a new folder. A new folder. Go. Folder on here. I guess I can't create a new folder on here. Why can't I create libraries? I have the rights to it. Huh. my view. In my documents.
Come on, ask to
It's,
create.
oh, I see why, because it's not in my actual documents. That's why. See. It's opening up the public documents and not the real my documents. See. There we go. So that's why I didn't have a save, because I was trying to create a new folder in my in the documents that are on the public folder, and I don't have permission to create a new folder on the public document, but I do on my computer. So on my computer, I could click onto new folder, and I could create a new folder called the Mark Branham's super duper awesome stuff. So that's going to be where I'm going to save mine, is in the Mark Branham super duper awesome stuff. And the file name that we want to save this as is your name. So I'm going to call it the Branham Mark, because I'm Mark Branham, adventure flyer. If you brought a thumb drive, I would recommend saving it to your thumb drive so that you can keep it. If you want to save it to your thumb drive, you would do File and then Save. And when you do the save, you click on a Browse. And when you do Browse, you'd scroll down and find your thumb drive. And you would click onto your thumb drive, and then that would be where you would where you could save it. If you didn't, you can just save it. I would recommend just saving it on the desktop for this class. One of the things about the machines in this classroom is that we have deep freeze installed on these machines, which means that every time that you reboot the machine or anytime you shut down the machine, it wipes the computer clean and restores it back to the way that it was at before you came in. So that means that if you save it on the desktop and you don't save it someplace else also, you're going to lose whatever it was that you did. But for the moment, you can save it onto the desktop, as long as you don't reboot the machine. Questions so far?
Our thumb drive would be E.
I'm sorry?
Our thumb drive would be E.
Yeah, thumb drive would be E. Yeah, drive E. Other questions? Any problems? All right. So as exciting as black font is on white background and Calibri font is and so on, this really is kind of boring. So we're going to make it look awesome. So to make it look awesome, the first thing that we want to do is we want to take our paragraph and we want to center it. Now, there are several ways of centering things. The lame way of centering things is to click on to the center button in the paragraph on home. You can do it that way, but there is a way cooler way of doing it. And the way cooler way of doing it is the keyboard shortcut. And the keyboard shortcut for center is Control-E. So any place inside of Adventure, if I do Control-E, it's going to center my text. For that matter, if I do Control-R, it right justifies it. If I do Control-L, it forces left justify. And if I do, again, Control-E, center. The reason it's not Control-C is because Control-C is used to copy. And by the way, on the Mac, it's Command whatever. So Command-E centers, Command-R right, Command-L left. All right, center. They also want us to center, I think they want us to center the Book Your Adventure. So if we go to Book Your Adventure, we center Book Your Adventure as well. Pretty sure they want us to. All right, we go back to adventure. What we want to do is we want to change this entire line. There are several ways of selecting the entire line. One way of selecting the entire line is that if I single click and drag, I can drag it across. That's one way I could do it. Another way to do it is that if you double click, it will select a word. So if I'm over here and I double click breathtaking, it will select breathtaking. If you triple click a word, it selects the whole paragraph. So if I go to adventure and I triple click, it'll select the whole thing. Now it turns out there's yet another way to select the whole thing using your mouse. And that is that if you take your mouse and you put it in the middle of the screen, you'll notice that it has kind of an I-beam. Got a little eye. If you move that I-beam all the way to the left so that it leaves the body of the text, it goes away from being an I-beam and into being an arrow pointing up. When it's an arrow pointing up, if you click on the paragraph, it will select that paragraph, or that line, really. It'll select that line, not so much the paragraph. It'll select that entire line. So again, there are lots of different ways that you can select the whole thing. Pick whichever one you want to do. And once you have adventure fully picked, what they want us to do is they want us to change the font to size 72. So to change the font to size 72, you have, again, many choices. One choice is to click on the drop-down menu in font and pick 72. Another choice is that there's this little A with an arrow pointing up. If you click onto the A clicking up, it will slowly get it up to, bigger and bigger and bigger as you're going along. If I do the decrease, it will decrease. So I could increase or decrease it to get it to 72. Another way to get it to 72 is that I could literally go into where the number 72 is, and I could literally type in 72 and then press enter or press tab or click to the side, and it will make it be 72. This is the only way to do it if you want it to be something that you can't get by clicking on a drop-down menu or using the increase decrease. So if I use increase decrease, the next size down is 48. It goes 48 up to 72. And if I click on the drop-down menu, it goes 48 to 72. Well, what if I want it to be 54? If I want it to be 54, I have to type it. I'd have to type in 54, and then it would do 54. So it will let you do that. It just won't be one of the automatic choices. You have to manually type that in if that's what you want. But in this case, they want us to do 72. So we do 72. We got giant-sized adventure. All right, another thing that we can do is we can change what the font is. So to change what the font is, this is right here, where we have the font. I can click on the drop-down menu, and I can pick the font. And the font they want us to pick is Berlin Sans FB Demi. Not Berlin Sans FB, but Berlin Sans FB Demi. So I need to scroll down to Berlin Sans FB Demi, for demi bold, meaning slightly more than semi-bold. And that's what they want. So it'll be adventure. The next thing they want us to do is they want us to change the font from being in sentence case to being in all uppercase. So what I wanted to show you before I do that is that you can change your case really easily. It's in font, and it's where we have this double A icon. So the double A icon indicates that this is a where you can change your font. And you can change it from sentence case, which is what it currently is. I can make it lowercase, I can make it uppercase, I can capitalize each word, or I can toggle case. So don't choose toggle case, but I'm going to show you what toggle case looks like. So if I change this to toggle case, it looks like that, adventure. If for some reason you want it to look like that, that's how you would do it. If I wanted to toggle it back, again, I could click onto the double A and toggle, and it would go back. If I say uppercase, it's going to be in all uppercase. If I say lowercase, it's going to be in all lowercase. So this can be really useful if you need to quickly change a bunch of text all into uppercase or into lowercase or whatever. that can be a really useful thing. Questions or problems or issues so far? Everybody with me? Okay. Next is on page 20. So what we want to do on page 20 is we want to add special effects to this. And to do that, we are going to go on to where it says text effects and typography. So if I click onto the text effects and typography, there's a bunch of really cool special effects that you can add. You can add, like, with the cool gradient fill with a reflection, and you can choose different shadow effects if you want. You can add different types of reflections. You can add glowing effects to your document or to your words. There's a lot of really cool new features that that you can use in Word. And one of the things that's great about this is that in the olden days being 1999, 2000, 2003, when dinosaurs roamed the earth and whatnot, you used to have to use a tool like Photoshop to add these kinds of effects, and had to spend like thousands and thousands of dollars in order to make it work like this. Yeah, you can do it for free. It's all built in. Pretty cool. Pretty cool. Now, the one they want us to do is, it's not bad, but it's not totally awesome. It's this one. So the one they want us to add is the fill white outline accent 1 glow accent 1, which is this guy right here. So I click onto that, and now I've got adventure looking like this. Now, the reason that they have us doing like this is because what they really want us to do is they want us to change the background color of the paragraph. So normally the background color of your paragraph is, well, clear. It's, not really a background at all. It's just clear. And on white paper, clear becomes white. So what they want us to do is they want us to select that paragraph again. So again, however you want to select the paragraph, select the paragraph. And then what they want us to do is they want us to go into the paragraph setting. And in the paragraph setting, there is this little icon right here. And this little icon, it is, it's supposed to be a paint bucket. And it's supposed to be a paint bucket pouring paint. So if you look at it carefully, it's got a tipped over paint bucket with paint spilling out of it. Or at any rate, that's what it's supposed to look like. And by default, it has no fill at all, no color. That's the default. But they want us to change this to being green, darker 25%. So in green, they want us to do darker 25%, which is the one that is one above the one on the right. So the far right side, one above the end, is the darker 25%. When I click that, I now have adventure. Sometimes people accidentally choose this one, the highlight. You don't want to do highlight. So the difference between highlight and paragraph fill is this. So I did the paragraph fill. If I select the text and I do highlight, I'll make it yellow highlight. It'll show you what the difference is. So the highlight selects only the text and creates a background around the text, but not the paragraph, not the entire line, just the words. And if the words didn't fill up the whole page, even more obvious, the difference between what highlight does versus what background does. So the one that you want to choose is the shade background, not the text highlight. And anytime you want to undo something, Word keeps track of the last, I think it's 100, something like that, things that you have done. So if you look over here in my quick access toolbar, yours might be up at the top. It depends on where you the quick access toolbar was placed. But usually the quick access toolbar is going to have all of the most recent thingies that you have done. Maybe it's 25. I forget exactly how many it is that they now do. And so you can undo up to those many different things that you can do. So you can undo by clicking onto that, or the keyboard shortcut for undo is Control-Z. Control-Z does an undo. All right, a couple more things and then we'll take a break. What we want to do next is we want to select the Explore down to Provided. So we want to select all of this. And once we have selected all of this, they want us to change the font to size 24. So we change the font to size 24. And then where we have self-guided tours and open March through October and all vehicles and gears provided, they want this to be done as a bullet. So to do bullets, it's found inside of a home, inside a paragraph, the little dots, the 3 little dots creates bullets. And in fact, if you were to click onto that drop-down menu on the dots, there are different types of bullets that you can do. So by default, the bullets are going to be bullets, but they can actually be anything. And if you want to create your own bullet, you can create your own bullet by clicking on Define New Bullet. And when you define the new bullet, you can click on the symbol and you can pick whatever symbol you want to be your bullet. So by default, people use, the bullet, but if you wanted to be, I don't know, check marks, you could do check marks. And if I did check marks, they'd become check marks. Now, I don't want you to do this really because the book wants you to have them be bullets. And so we're looking for bullets, but you could be bullets if you wanted. I could go on the drop down. If I go into define a new bullet, if I click on the symbol and I don't like any of these symbols, and there are a bajillion symbols, but if you don't like any of these symbols, and you don't like any of these symbols, you can, there's a whole subset of other symbols that you can do. If you don't like any of those, you can instead choose picture, and you can then find a picture that you might want to use. So say, for example, you were thinking, gosh and golly, I sure wish I had bullets of Mark Branham, because, who wouldn't? You can have bullets that are Mark Branham, because, Mark Branham bullets are, totally awesome. The point is that by default, bullets are bullets, but you could make them be things other than bullets. Similarly, if you were doing numbers, they could be things other than numbers. All right. Did that. Did that. All right, page 25. Another thing that you can do is you can make text go in italic. So to make things in italic, you can either use the lame old way of clicking on the little I button to make things in italic, or you can do the totally awesome way, which is Control I, or on a Mac, Command I. So they want the word breathtaking to be in italic. So again, to select just the word breathtaking, I think the best way to do that is to double click the word breathtaking. You double click the word breathtaking, it's going to select just the word breathtaking. Control I makes it into italics. Now, they also want breathtaking to be orange, accent to darker 25%. So to do that, it's inside of font. It's this little A with a red line underneath it. That's the thingy that we use to determine the color. And then they want us to be an orange, but they want it to be a darker orange, which I think is it 25%? Yeah, 25%. Because orange by itself is kind of hard to read, so better to do that. The next thing they want us to do is they want to book your adventure. They want book your adventure to be size 28. So again, to select the entire paragraph, instead of a double click, we can do a triple click. So if we triple click any of the words in to book your adventure, it will select the entire paragraph. And the way the book tells you to do it is to use the mini toolbar. I hate the mini toolbar. I recommend that you never use the mini toolbar. The reason I recommend that you never use the mini toolbar are several, but the main one is that it encourages you to actually change your font using what is known as direct formatting. What we've been doing so far is direct formatting. The problem with direct formatting, and we'll get more into this later on next week, is that in direct formatting, if I make a change, and I like my change, and I want to replicate that change throughout, I have to copy exactly what I did throughout. Whereas if I make a style, all I need to do is change the style, and it will automatically use that same style all the way throughout. It's a much better way of handling it, and we'll talk more about this next week. But the point is that direct formatting tends to be a bad way of formatting your text, and using the mini toolbar actually encourages you to do direct formatting. Now, if your document is only one page, then I think direct formatting is okay. If we're doing a flyer, flyer's only one page, I think it's okay to do direct formatting. But I would still recommend against using the mini toolbar, and instead I would recommend using the actual toolbar. And what size did they want? 28, size 28. So we'll go in and make this size 28. But to read more about the mini toolbar, it's on page 27. All right, next thing they want us to do is they want us to make Book Your Adventure the same color as Breathtaking. Now, since we just used it, it means that the color is still going to be there. By default, Word will keep whatever the last color that you used, it'll keep that in its as the default color choice. So if I click on the font color, it should still be that same orange. Now, the next thing that they're going to have you do is something that, depending on the type of flyer you are making, I would strongly advise you never to do. And that is, they want us to underline the telephone number, 555-8928. Anyone think of why underlining could possibly be a bad choice? Let me ask you this. How many people here never go onto web pages? Really? You never go onto web pages? Not even on your phone, you never go onto web pages?
Yeah, well, I don't use them. I just look at them.
Well, that's what I'm saying, looking at them, going to them, actually looking at a web page. What happens if there is a web page and there is a word and there is a line underneath the word? What does that indicate? It indicates that it's a link. It indicates that you could click on it and have it go someplace. So the problem with using underline in modern times is that using the underline, people might think that I can press this and that it will go someplace. And they'll get mad at you when they try to click on the link and it didn't go anyplace. This is why the MLA and the Chicago Turabian and the other types of styles for writing scientific and research papers no longer recommend that you use underlining. And instead, that anytime you want to do an emphasis, that you always and only use italics. And if you really want to emphasize something, bold. And if you really, really want to emphasize both bold and italic, but that you reserve underlining for hyperlinks. That said, the book wants us to do underline, so we'll do underline. But especially if you were taking this and you're making like a PDF, or you're taking this and you're saving it as a web page, never, ever, ever do underlining. When in doubt, don't use underline in anything. All right, bold. So bold, they want the words off-road to be in bold. So one of the ways that you could select off-road is, again, you could click and drag. If I double click on off, I can double click and then drag. If I were to triple click, of course, it's going to select the whole thing. So I don't want to do that. So there's yet another way that you can select text. And when I am selecting text using a keyboard, I often will do that because using the keyboard, you can have more control over exactly and only the thingies that you want to select. So to use the keyboard to select, if I hold down my shift key and then I use my keyboard for moving, so again, if I want to go by character, I use the right or left arrow key. So if I hold down the shift key and I do a right arrow, it will select O. And if I do it again, it will do F and hyphen and R and then O and then A and then D. That will ensure that I'm only selecting those exact letters that I want. If I only wanted the letter O in road to be giganto-sized, I could do that. And that would be the way that I would make it so that would happen. But again, what they want is they want off-road to be bolded. And to do bold, you can either click on the B button, which is the lame way, the cool way, Control B. That's what all the cool kids do. Control B. If you really think the cool kids do that, then that's okay. All right. So we're almost done with the content of our flyer. So the next thing that we want to do is we want to zoom out so we can see what it looks like. So if I click on onto view and I click onto one page, it's going to zoom out so I can see how my flyer is shaping up. And so that's how it's looking so far. On page 31, the book is telling us that they want us to change the theme colors that we are using, and that's fine. You can change the theme colors. The information that they say on there is accurate for Western culture. So one of the things that I think is important to remember is that not everybody lives in the United States. Not everybody lives in, North America and so on. And so while in the US, red generally expresses danger and power and energy and sports and physical exertion, and brown is simplicity, and orange is success, and so on, that may or may not be true in other places. And so you want to keep that in mind when you are thinking about what you're doing. what I always tell people is the biggest mistake that people make in writing anything, whether it is writing a paper, whether it's sending an email, whether it's writing a newspaper article, whether it's building a computer application, anything, doing a painting even, is not paying attention to who your audience is and making sure that your audience wants what you are producing. And so the biggest mistake that people often make is they write their paper the way that they want their paper to be written, which, if the way that your teacher wants it to be written is the same, is good, but might not be. So you always want to think about who your target audience is and address the needs of your target audience with whatever it is that you're doing. So in this case, since we are in the US, we're going to assume that it's going to a US audience, and so we can go ahead and choose the theme based on that. And the theme they want us to do is green, because green symbolizes growth, harmony, happiness, and healing, and it's associated with safety. And, you know, so I don't know why they want us to do green, because that's not really safe, but that's what they want us to do. So to change the color theme, we go into the design tab. And on the design tab, we go under colors. And when we go under colors, the color that they want us to do is the green color. So by changing this from the office color scheme to the green color scheme, it means that all of our colors have now changed. And in fact, if you go back home, you will notice that if you click on the drop-down menu for the shading choices have all changed. It's now, instead of green on the right-hand side, it's purple on the right-hand side. One of the things that you will encounter is that on one of your homework assignments, I forget if it's this time or next time, I think it's this time, it's going to ask you to change your theme and to change the theme colors. And then you'll find the color that it's asking you for. And people will say, I can't find this color, it's not on my machine. And I'll say, yes, it is. And they'll say, no, it's not on my machine, see? And then they'll show me, and I'll say, right, because you haven't changed your color theme. Pay attention to what the computer tells you, or what the book tells you to do on this. One of the things I am fond of saying, computers are stupid. They do exactly what you tell them to do, and only precisely exactly what you tell them to do. So if you do not tell them to change to the green color scheme, well then in the drop-down menu, it's not going to have purple there, it's going to have green. All right. Changing themes. I think that's the end of the stuff I wanted to talk about at this point. What questions do people have about anything at all that we've done so far? Yeah.
It's so cool.
Oh, thank you. All right. So what I want to do at this point is I want to save what we're doing so we don't accidentally lose it or whatever. So again, to save, because we've previously saved, we can just do a Control S to save, S for save. Another thing you can do is this guy over here again is called the Quick Access Toolbar. Very often the QAT or Quick Access Toolbar is found up here. And usually on the QAT, there's going to be a little picture of a floppy disk. That's the symbol for save. So you can click onto the floppy disk, and it will also save. All right, it's 7:42. Why don't we take about a 15-minute break or so, come back around 8, And what we're going to do when we come back is we are going to add pictures to our awesome, awesome, awesome flyer. So that's going to be what we'll do when we come back. But like I said, let's go ahead and take a little break. And if you have any questions, stick around and I'll happily answer them and so on.